Does your third generation Honda Odyssey door have trouble staying open? Has your Honda Odyssey inadvertently locked you out of your own vehicle while you were unloading items out of your vehicle? Has your wife made numerous complaints to you to replace this vehicle because the doors keep closing on their own?
We need a new car.
So if you've answered yes to any of those questions that were previously asked, then all you need to do is spend a measly $20 to buy a replacement door checker assembly for your Honda Odyssey. And it takes about 15 minutes to install, and I'm going to give you a quick video tutorial on how to do so. So before we begin, we need to do a few preparation steps before we can actually remove the door checker assembly. The first step is to making sure that you either park your vehicle on a level surface or park the van in such a manner that it is pointing downhill. And the reason why is that you don't want the actual door assembly to be continually closing on you because you parked on an angle. You need to remove the plastic cover behind the door handle assembly, and how you can do it is using a small fine-tipped flathead screwdriver. There's a little notch in this little area where you can just kind of pry up a tiny little tab here, and then just sort of, and essentially what this cover does is it just pops out. Get a flat bladed screwdriver and wrap the tip with a little bit of duct tape to protect the plastic surfaces from marring, and insert it into this little slot here below in the armrest holder, and using a separate pry tool like this, pry up and twist the screwdriver in such a manner that this cover assembly comes loose, and then there'll be clips located here, and remove the switch assembly from the vehicle. Once the switch assembly has been removed from the door panel, disconnect the wiring harness connectors. Before the door panel can be removed, there are 4 Phillips screws that need to be undone. 2 are located here behind the handle. If you can see that, there's 1 in there and 1 down there. 1 tucked away inside there, as well as 1 underneath above the upper pocket. Using a trim tool panel remover, such as this, proceed to remove the side mirror cover. And how I'm going to remove it is I'm going to place this tool into the upper edge right here and just gently pry so that the clips release, and it should require minimal effort, and you can remove it as such. This is what it looks like. And then to remove the actual door panel, I typically find a spot along the door seam in this region here, and I use my knee to bolster the door and gently kind of peel this panel away to get this tool behind, and then pry up as such, and you can actually hear and feel all the plastic clips release. In fact, it's so easy that I can actually now just use my bare hands to just remove this door panel. And then how this panel would actually come off once the rivets have been released is I would lift, if it's the driver's side door, the left side of the door panel where the power door lock actuator is, and lift up to remove the entire door assembly. So as I continue to lift up the door panel assembly, I will notice that I can't necessarily pull the door away from the door frame itself because there's a green connector right here, as well as a door opening handle release cable here, as well, if I remember correctly, on this Honda Odyssey Touring, the memory seat switch as well. So I'm just going to reach here behind this door panel, if you can see it, to release the memory seat connector, which is this one. I'm going to pinch this connector, which I believe is for the light, and disconnect it here. And then ultimately, to disconnect this door handle, if you can see it, I don't know if you can see it, but you basically have to unclip it, slide this clip piece out right here, and swing it off of the cable assembly as such. And then once that's out, you can lift this cable out and then basically just disconnect this cable right here. To gain access to the door checker, or to at least be able to remove it from the vehicle, what we need to do is actually peel back the acoustic water splash guard that's behind the door panel. That's how I'm demonstrating here. And then using a 10mm ratchet, undo the 2 screws here, as well as undoing the 12mm bolt that's holding this assembly to the car's frame. And then we're going to remove the assembly out from inside this door assembly coming out from this way. bolts can be quite tight, so you got to make sure that if you have any type of corrosion or anything like that that's making the bolts difficult to remove, that you lubricate them with sufficient oil to make the removal process easier. Now that god-awful cracking noise that you heard was actually a result of this door checker 12mm bolt bolting into the A assembly of the door. It's held in with some type of thread locker. It looks like blue Loctite. Key thing here is that if you torque it down sufficiently, you don't need to replace the thread locker. Once the 3 bolts have been removed, so the two 10mm bolts that were holding it in, the entire checker assembly can actually be pushed through the door as such in this manner, and then removed out of the door as such, and this is what it looks like fully removed. How you can check the door checkers for wear is to compare the old one against the new one. So for example, on this one, if I push hard enough onto the checker, I can actually in fact move this checker and actually pull it through by hand, and it actually doesn't require much effort at all, indicating that this portion here, as well as the nylon bushings that clamp these rib sections down, have completely worn out. Comparing it against the brand new one, it's a lot tighter, and in fact I can't even move it by hand because it is so tight. So that goes to show that these devices do wear out. Now typically when we're replacing the door checkers on a vehicle, we don't normally just replace the one side, but in fact we replace doors in pairs. Now since the Honda Odyssey only has 2 doors that swing out and 2 sliding doors, that naturally there would only be 2 door checkers available. Now one of the things that I've been asked before in the past was, how do we identify the difference between the left and right door checker? And the easiest way to do so is to compare the new part versus the old part. So here, Honda part number 72380SHJA01. I just took this one out of the packaging, and I'm just comparing it against the old one. And they look very similar, with the exception that if you look at where the frame mount is, it's the opposite side. So I know that this side has got to be this 72380SHJA01 must be the right hand side, while the appropriate one for the driver's side is a 72340SHJA01, which is this piece right here. And comparing the parts side by side, I can tell that they're exactly the same. To reinstall the door checker, we essentially follow our exact steps of removal, but in an opposite manner. So I'm going to take the new assembly, even though my old one was fully extended when I removed it, that I'm going to take this new one that I can't actually move on my own, and just fish it through the little hole in the door assembly to come back out to the door frame here. And I wouldn't be too hung up on the fact that you can't get access or you can't get this component to touch, because we can actually bring the pieces together by simply closing the door a little bit and then loosely tightening everything up. So I'm putting the two 10mm bolts back into the checker. I'm just going to tighten these by hand for now. And then to get the 12mm one on, I'm going to close the door slightly, as such, in a manner like this, so that I can actually reach in and carefully screw this one back in so that it at least holds the checker against the frame. And then as long as you've tightened it down the reasonable amount of threads, in fact in my case I'm just going to tighten it right down, and it just needs to be hand tight, by the way. I can now open the door back up so that the checker is fully extended, and then using my 10mm ratchet and socket to tighten the ones that I didn't tighten completely before. So that is essentially how you replace a door checker assembly for the driver's side. I would do a video tutorial on the passenger side, but the process of doing so is exactly the same. For reassembly purposes, we just need to push the water shield and the appropriate adhesive sealant back into place so that it all holds together. And then I'm going to grab the door panel and basically put the assembly back together in the reverse order of removal. So as I bring the door panel up to the car, I need to make sure that I reconnect on my vehicle the memory seat connector, the cable assembly for the door handle, which can be a little bit tricky if you don't have an extra set of hands to help you with. But essentially I'm going to take this and fish this through the latching mechanism here, lock down the cable, push this cable nub through the metal frame holder, if you can see it, sorry if you can't, and then lock the cable back in, and then last but not least, reconnect the interior light cable assembly. Once that's all hooked in, looking from the top of the door panel assembly, make sure that you actually pull through the power window and power lock harnesses through this hole, and then lifting the door panel corner on this end, on the mirror side, you want to kind of gently finesse this so that it kind of hooks back in onto this frame. And then you need to just kind of mess around with the door plunger assembly. So in a nutshell, I just gotta get this plunger to line up properly. And sometimes it would be helpful if you had a small screwdriver to help you align everything. But in my particular case, it's just luck of the draw. So what I've essentially done is I've hooked this door panel back onto that lip, making sure that the door plunger, has passed through, as well as the fact that this cable goes through this panel, and making sure that there's no rubbing against the weather strip versus the interior trim piece. And once that's complete, you can sort of line up all the holes of where these little plastic rivet plugs would go under the door panel, and essentially just snap this door panel right back in, and making sure that the plunger moves freely, and if it doesn't, then you can kind of shift this door panel around just a hair to make sure that there's no binding, and in this case it's nice and smooth, and replace all the screws. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws and all the plastic clips. And a properly assembled door panel will not only not bind with the door lock plunger, but the cables will pass through and all the holes should line up perfectly, including all the plastic rivets, and it should be effortless to do the reinstall. My final step here is to reinstall this little trim piece here by just snapping it back into place. As such, and then just a quick wipe of some interior dirt and dust from the window switch assembly. I can now simply plug all the pieces that I had plugged earlier and plug it all back in as such, and basically reinstall this switch assembly by snapping it onto place, and it'll snap in nice and firm because it was really tight. And now you can actually check to make sure that there's no binding of anything, which there isn't. And my final piece here, and reinstall the cover as it came out as. Works like a champ. Who needs a new car?